Forest rangers, what are your downright unexplainable stories? I'm not a forest ranger, but I'm a soil conservationist for the USDA. I spend a lot of time out looking at cropland and CRP, Conservation Reserve Program, prairie restorations. Needless to say, it's not uncommon for me to find myself miles from the nearest road. One time I was out looking at CRP in a heavily wooded area of my county. I was probably half a mile or so off the road on a trail when I came upon a small clearing with what appeared to be an abandoned playground and school bus. There was a rusty swing set and a huge rainbow merry-go-round. Alone this would have creeped me out, but I was truly terrified to see the merry-go-round spinning extremely fast. There was no wind in the clearing, so somebody, or something, had to have been making it spin. I called out and nobody answered. I turned around and left. I figured it may have been an old school, so I took a look at our old maps and asked our archaeologist to look into it. We couldn't find anything about it. I haven't gone back. I told my boss he could go look at it. Not sure if he ever did. I'm not a superstitious person, but this made the hair on my neck stand up. I own land in the mountains and camp there sometimes. One night I was awake around 4 a.m. lying still in my hammock looking at the stars. Then disturbingly close by, I heard the unmistakable sound of something big, with a big bladder, urinate. I could clearly hear the sound change as the hard dry dirt became wet, then a small puddle, then a muddy puddle as the stream went on and on. The most common animals large enough to pee that long and loud are deer and coyotes, and there are also bobcats and rarely wolves and bears. Never figured out what it actually was. I fell back asleep and woke when the sun was well up. No prints or telltale puddle to be found. Something similar happened to my husband and me while we were camping at the Wildrose campground in Death Valley, NP. It was in August and probably about 4 a.m. We had been out photographing the Perseids meteor shower earlier in the night and had just returned to our tent and barely fallen asleep. At first we just heard a rustle in the brush, then some heavy footsteps, followed by urination that lasted a very long time. We just sat up and looked at each other, wondering what this could be. Then the burros started braying, and we knew exactly what it was. Friend was a ranger. He said he got people demanding the animals to come out for photo ops daily. Lots of other stories about just how stupid the average person is. Stupidest version I ever heard of was in a Darwin Awards book I used to have. Supposedly a ranger in Yellowstone stopped some woman from spreading honey on her kid's hand so she could get a photo of a bear licking it off. This is more like just another Tuesday in Yellowstone. I've seen the true depths of human stupidity there. It's fucking impressive. I'm pretty sure this guy was from Yellowstone, but I remember seeing a quote from a park ranger on the difficulty of designing new bear-proof garbage cans. The quote was, "The gap between the smartest bears and the stupidest tourist is not a very large one." One that went unexplained for several years until I saw it happen was why hearing the sound of a baby screaming during the night. Turns out that frogs being eaten by snakes should like crying babies. Both the reality and the imagined source of the sound are pretty freaky. Coyotes, dying rabbits, bobcats, hell. Even elk sound absolutely terrifying and ethereal in the dark in the woods. I think most legends come from people hearing that shit for the first time in the middle of the night. To be fair, the average person has no idea what those things are supposed to sound like. I hope I never have to find out in person. I am not a ranger, but my neighbor used to be one for the National Park Service. He told me two stories that were eerie. My favorite is the time he was making the rounds at a park in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a gorgeous night with a bright moon, clear skies, and a nice 75 degrees. Anyways, 30 minutes into his shift and he felt something liquid tap onto his shoulder. Even though at a clear night he didn't think anything of it because it could be an animal doing its business up in the tree. Anyways, he wiped it away only to notice that the liquid was sticky. He flashed his light on his fingers and saw blood, which startled him but not as much as what he saw next. When he shined his light up the tree, way up top was the carcass of a mangled male deer. Its body was totally ripped up and twisted. Obviously seeing this is creepy as heck, but what really bothered him was that the tree the deer was hanging from was really tall and difficult to climb. The first 20 feet of the tree had no branches and the deer carcass was maybe 100 feet up in the tree. When he went back the next day he was able to verify that. I argued that it was a cougar or some other mountain lion. However, he didn't think a cougar would stash their prey that high up. Also, he told me that there were no cougars in that park, let alone in the state. If anyone wants, I can also tell the other creepy stories he told me. Edit, looks like the consensus is that a very ambitious cougar might have done the deed. Wildlife bio who works with forest rangers. My most unexplainable story was the woman who tried to pet a bear because it was wearing a radio collar and she thought it was a pet bear that someone owned. I just can't even begin to explain her logic. And then? Either death, someone stopped her, or she's very lucky and managed to pet a bear before being told to back off. Littering and? I was a ranger for Glacier National Park in northern Montana. We got a call around 3 Amish for camper in distress near our post but would require a 45 minutes hike through some pretty rocky terrain to get there. So we geared up and start hiking. Me and my partner are about 30 minutes into our hike when I just get a gut feeling that something isn't right. Keep in mind it's pitch black only using headlamps in the middle of grizzly territory. We are about 10 minutes out and we start to hear this sound of a baby crying, so we kick it into high gear and start shouting and moving faster until I notice something odd and my gut completely dropped. The sound of the child crying was played on a loop. It was the same cry over and over again. I told my partner to stop and listen to prove I wasn't going crazy. He was a new hire and I just saw all the color on the kid's face vanish when he realized also. We decided to hightail it out of there, fearing for our lives in the unknown. Never got another call of a stranded camper after we left. I still get chills telling the story. Used to help a friend who had a farm try to thin out the coyote pack that was going after his animals. Basically would go out in the middle of the night with lights and a sound machine that played various noises of animals in distress to try to lure the coyotes in for a shot. One night some of his other family members came out as well and set up across the field that we were in. One of the sounds on their sound machine sounded exactly like a baby crying, and it was the most eerie thing to be sitting out in the woods in the middle of the night and to hear that off in the distance. Roy Sullivan is truly a tragic case. Struck by lightning 7 different times. Also, this interesting tidbit about the last strike. Sullivan turned to his car when something unexpected occurred. A bear approached the pond and tried to steal trout from his fishing line. Sullivan had the strength and courage to strike the bear with a tree branch. He claimed that this was the 22nd time he hit a bear with a stick in his lifetime. I've never even hit one bear in my lifetime with a stick. The lightning strikes were because God feared the unrestrained power of Roy Sullivan. What in the actual heck? I get that he was a forest ranger and thus more likely than the average person to be hit by lightning, but with 7 strikes, at least, you start to wonder if he pissed off Zeus or something. I watch a dude in YouTube, or at least I did when my alcoholism was raging. He goes around with a metal detector and he digs shit up. Coins and bottle caps mostly. He says he's always wary of strange looking clearings in the middle of nowhere. He's always afraid that it means pot, and he isn't as worried about getting shot anymore, not these days, but he's terrified of their old booby traps. Former wildlife biologist here with extensive field work experience. I had the same fears when I happened upon a clearing that shouldn't have been where I found it. What's the channel name? Sounds like an interesting watch on a boring day. Aquakigger. Some URL. This isn't a ranger story but a marine story. A buddy of mine is a marine and was doing an exercise deep in the woods with his unit one day, and he eventually got lost. After walking around for about an hour trying to figure out where he was, he came across 3 guys and asked them for directions. They pointed him in the direction of his camp and he was able to get back. Shortly after he got back, him and his unit started to pack to leave, so he told his sergeant that there were still guys out in the woods. His sergeant said that he was the last one back and they were waiting on him to leave. He told his buddies about it, and it turns out that another unit that did exercises in that area way back in the day had 3 Marines go missing. There have been other Marines that got lost in that same area say they had the same experiences of running into 3 guys that pointed them in the right direction. Nah, good guy Marines. I'm not a ranger but spend a lot of time in the backcountry. You'd be surprised how many dildos you find out there. We used to find a ton of porn in the woods. Figured the porn fairy left it for us. As a kid in the 70s I would find porn magazines in the woods. What was weird is that I spent a lot of time in the woods and never saw anyone else. It was mystery forest porn. Weirdest thing I ever found in the backcountry was a porcelain teacup hanging from a tree branch several miles from the nearest trail. My trips have been suspiciously bereft of dildos.